Hi, welcome to Module 2. This module will start getting pretty technical. So we're going to start by talking about the blockchain flow. We'll talk about the process of how a block becomes a block and how blocks are chained together in the blockchain.
And next we'll talk about fault tolerance, how we make sure that our network doesn't go down, and the notion of consensus. When there are multiple copies of the ledger, how do we make sure that there's a consensus about what's in that ledger?
So finally, we'll talk about identity and anonymity. When we use cryptography, we make things readable only by people who have permission. How do we determine someone's identity, and how do we know what they're allowed to read and what they're allowed to write?
In 1982, a team of computer scientists documented a mathematical problem called the Byzantine general problem. Without getting too detailed around the mathematics behind it, the Byzantine generals problem was really a story about two empires fighting a battle. One empire exists within the confines of a walled city. The second empire has several generals surrounding that walled city, each with their armies waiting to attack. And the balance of the power amongst these two empires is very, very evenly matched, which means that all of the generals waiting to attack from the outside must agree to converge on the city at the same time in order to have enough power to overcome the empire in the city and win the campaign. If for whatever reason they're not able to coordinate their attacks simultaneously, and even one general misses the message and timing, the empire surrounding the walled city is going to lose the campaign and the war. So the Byzantine generals problem explored a really key area of cryptography. In fact, the heart of what cryptography is, which is, how do I exchange messages with somebody in an environment where those messages may become corrupt, or one or more of the generals may be a traitor and is sending false messages. Understand that the only way these generals had to communicate was to send a disguised messenger through the city with a message to deliver to the other generals. And so, this always posed the risk that if you're a general and you're getting a message from one of those messengers, how can you believe with greater than random certainty that that message you're getting is reliable and hasn't been tampered with? And this, again, was a problem that was postulated back in 1982 and went unsolved until 2008 when the anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto proposed a solution to this problem. Through the use of public-private key cryptography, the distributed nature of blockchain, and shared consensus, messages could now get through to all of the Byzantine generals with a very, very high degree of certainty. They're accurate, despite whether or not all of the messengers or generals could be trusted. This is known as Byzantine fault tolerance. It is the root of cryptography, which is simply the study of how can we send information back and forth securely in the presence of adversaries and bad actors. And it's what underlies all of the security and immutability that we get in blockchain.
On a blockchain, there are multiple copies of the transactions or ledgers that are being stored on the chain. Having multiple copies helps make sure that the transaction can't be deleted or changed. But how do we make sure that all of these copies are the same? We use what are called consensus mechanisms. Consensus mechanisms provide a way for everyone on the network to check and see whether their records match up. There are many ways to do this now, but the very first one was called proof of work. Creating the proof of work protocol was a truly revolutionary achievement. It laid the groundwork for all of the technologies in blockchain that we see today. Proof of work was described in Satoshi Nakamoto's paper when the blockchain network was created, and proof of work is still used in the Bitcoin blockchain and many other blockchains today. Recording and validating all of the transactions that are stored on a blockchain is a lot of work. The people doing this work set up computer systems, which are called nodes, and those computer systems are specifically designed to perform the functions. Validating the transactions takes a lot of resources and a lot of energy, so the people who do that need to be compensated. The Bitcoin network compensates these validators by rewarding them with Bitcoins. These validators are called miners because the process is a little bit like gold mining. When the miners work hard enough, they eventually find some gold. What the miners do in a blockchain is record all of the transactions in a block and then create a hash that summarizes all of the transactions. Next, the miners compete to solve a mathematical problem. The problem requires them to find a number that will make the hash of the whole block begin with a certain number of zeros. The only way to find this number is just to try a whole bunch of different numbers, which takes a lot of work, usually millions of numbers before someone can find the number that makes the hash start with 0. The first miner to find such a number is the winner, and that miner earns some Bitcoin. The winner can show proof of all this work by sharing this number with other miners. When the other miners type in the number, they'll get that same hash, which starts with the zeros. The reason proof of work was so revolutionary is that it provided a system of rules and incentives that could be used to make sure that when a transaction was recorded, it was accurate and it couldn't be changed. What this did, and what it still does, is allow people on the Bitcoin network to send money to each other directly without banks, and no one can dispute that transaction. It serves a similar function on other proof-of-work networks.
The second prominent consensus mechanism used on blockchains is called proof of stake. Proof of stake was developed in part as a reaction to some of the performance and energy consumption issues that we see with proof-of-work consensus protocols. Proof of stake uses what is sometimes referred to as block producers instead of the notion of miners, as in proof of work. In proof of stake, nodes that want to have a chance to build the next block put up a stake, which is monetary in nature, a certain value of cryptocurrency, for example. Each node that has put in a stake in the game becomes part of the pool of block producers that will build the next block. Without getting too technical in the way the next block producer is selected, because it varies by blockchain and use case, a node that has put in a stake is selected amongst all the stake nodes to work on the next block. This eliminates the need for hundreds or potentially thousands of nodes doing the work as in proof-of-work protocols, which also drastically reduces energy consumption and improves overall performance in the system. So let's say I'm the winning node. I'll apply in order all of the transactions that I accepted and decided were valid, and when the block is full, I place a hash of the prior block in the header, and I sign it with my unique signature, and then I broadcast it to all the other parties. Each participating node then independently verifies that I correctly applied the transactions and included the correct hash of the previous block. At that point, they will validate that block and it becomes a part of the blockchain and immutable. Instead of being awarded cryptocurrency, like a miner in proof of work, proof of stake block producers are actually rewarded in transaction fees. Proof of stake systems ensure against bad actors. If a block producer tries to produce a block in order to double spend that money from a transaction, for example, the rest of the participating validators will almost certainly uncover this anomaly and report it. If this happens, the block producer will not only not get rewarded, but they will also lose whatever amount that they have staked at the beginning. And in some cases, will be kicked out of the pool of block producers and never be able to participate again. Therefore, it is not in the block producer's best interest to try and cheat the system. In addition, if a breach were to happen on a proof of stake system in the blockchain world, currency would almost always be devaluated, which would have a negative effect on the bad actor, as the value of the currency, which they own, would be reduced significantly. In a way, this provides redundant fault tolerance to the system.
Public and private key cryptography is the way that we verify identity on a blockchain, and the way that we make sure that the participants who are sending messages and opening messages have the permission to do that. An analogy might help us understand how these public and private keys work. So imagine it like this. Bob has a two-tiered box. When it's locked, it allows items to pass from the top tier to the second tier. And the box has two separate keys, so there's one for each tier. The key to the first tier, the top tier, is the public key, and the key to the second tier is Bob's private key. So Bob can make lots of copies of his public key, and he can give those to anyone else who might send him a message. Let's say Alice wants to conduct a transaction with Bob. Bob gives a copy of the public key to Alice, but keeps the private key to himself. When Alice wants to send Bob a secret note or a transaction, she can open Bob's box, insert the note, and then close it again so that the box is secure. As soon as she closes that box, the message drops to Bob's tier, to the bottom tier, and only Bob has access to that tier. So on a simple level, this is how public key cryptography works.